I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Take a deep breath and try to travel back in time. Can you smell the sweet fermented scent of the tea mushroom sitting in a glass jar on a sunlit windowsill? Can you hear the heavy rhythmic ticking of the wooden cuckoo clock echoing through the quiet hallway of your childhood home? Or perhaps you can feel the distinct, heavy weight of a faceted glass filled with scorching hot black tea, held perfectly inside its metal holder. Welcome back. Today we are going to open a very special door into the past. We are going back to the 1970s and 1980s in Russia, a time that shaped who we are today. We are going to gently dust off 30 everyday items that were once the absolute center of our family lives. These are things that you will not find in modern stores, and today they might even seem strange to the younger generation. But for us, they hold the purest essence of our youth. Stay with me until the very end, because the final item we will remember is not just a forgotten object, but the very voice of our childhood, a sound that I promise will bring a warm tear to your eye. Before we gently unpack these memories, let us remember how time itself felt back then. Time flowed much slower. There was no constant rushing, no digital screens demanding our attention every single second, and absolutely no instant gratification. We lived in an era where things required our patience, our physical effort, and our care. We did not throw things away when they broke. We carefully repaired them, breathing new life into wood, metal, and glass. There is a modern myth that because we lacked the endless shiny gadgets of today, our lives were somehow poorer. But anyone who lived through those decades knows the exact opposite is true. Our lives were incredibly rich in emotion, in genuine human connection, and in the profound value of anticipation. Every object in our home had a story, a specific ritual, and usually required the whole family to gather around and participate. We relied entirely on each other, sharing recipes, tools, and time. The physical weight of the objects we used mirrored the solid, grounded reality of our lives. We are about to look at the artifacts of an era where genuine warmth came not from a thermostat, but from a bustling kitchen, a shared song, and a closely knit family. Let us begin our journey with a small, seemingly insignificant item that almost every person carried in their pocket during those years. I am talking about the classic string bag, affectionately known to everyone as the avoska. If you try, you can almost feel the rough, sturdy cotton threads of this woven net against your fingertips. It weighed absolutely nothing and could be crumpled up into a tiny ball, easily disappearing into the pocket of a winter coat or a modest handbag. But the capacity of this magical net was truly astounding. You would pull it out at the grocery store, hoping to buy whatever rare goods might be available on the shelves that afternoon. Imagine the heavy, cold glass bottles of milk or kefir, the round loaf of rye bread, and perhaps a few winter apples, all stretching the mesh to its absolute limits. As you walked home through the snowy streets, the heavy glass bottles would clink softly against each other, creating a familiar, comforting soundtrack of daily life. The thin threads would dig deeply into your freezing fingers, leaving distinct red lines that lasted long after you returned to the warmth of your kitchen. The most beautiful thing about this bag was its absolute transparency. Everyone on the street could see exactly what you were bringing home. There were no secrets. If you managed to find a rare treat, like fresh oranges for the new year, your neighbors would spot it immediately and ask you which store had them in stock. It was a silent communicator, connecting us all through the shared experience of providing for our families. Now let us move to the kitchen, the true heart of any home, and recall the heavy manual meat grinder. This was not a delicate plastic appliance you could simply plug into the wall and ignore. No, this was a massive piece of solid cast iron that required real physical effort and dedication. Do you remember the intricate ritual of attaching it to the edge of the wooden kitchen table? You always had to fold a small piece of thick cardboard, or find an old newspaper to slip under the metal clamp so you would not ruin the table's surface. Then came the tight turning of the screw until the heavy grinder was completely immobile. Turning that metal handle was a serious task that often required the strength of the whole family, taking turns when your arm got tired. You could hear that distinct, rhythmic squeaking sound as the metal gears ground against each other. You would carefully push chunks of meat down the funnel, while the fragrant minced meat slowly emerged from the small holes at the front. The intense smell of raw meat, mixed with pungent raw onions and fresh garlic, filled the warm kitchen air. When the meat was finally done, the last step was always to push a piece of dry rye bread through the grinder to clean out the remaining bits. Making pelmeni was a grand, joyful event where everyone sat around the table, their hands covered in white flour, talking and laughing for hours. If we look over at the kitchen windowsill, bathing in the pale afternoon sunlight, we will find a truly fascinating biological resident of our homes. The tea mushroom, often kept in a massive 3-liter glass jar, was something between a pet and a miracle cure. To a modern child, the thick, gelatinous, alien-like disc floating at the top of the dark amber liquid looks absolutely terrifying. But to us, it was a precious household treasure. Do you remember the piece of white medical gauze stretched tightly over the mouth of the jar, secured simply with a thin rubber band to let the creature breathe? The smell was unmistakable, a sharp, sweet, slightly vinegary scent of active fermentation. Caring for it was a strict weekly ritual. We would carefully brew fresh, strong black tea, dissolve generous spoonfuls of white sugar into it, and wait for it to cool perfectly before feeding our silent friend. In return for our care, it gave us a wonderfully fizzy, tangy drink that was incredibly refreshing on a sweltering summer day. Pouring a glass of this naturally carbonated elixir felt like drinking the essence of health. We rarely bought this mushroom. Instead, it was shared. When the mushroom grew too thick, mothers would gently peel off a slimy layer, place it in a smaller jar, and gift it to a neighbor or a relative, spreading this living tradition from home to home. As evening approached and the winter sky turned dark blue outside the frozen windows, a special kind of magic was prepared in the living room. I am talking about the slide projector and the beloved film strips. Long before the era of endless digital cartoons, this was our ultimate cinematic experience. The ritual began by finding a blank wall, or more often, pinning a simple white bedsheet over a doorway, or hanging it over the large wall carpet. When the main overhead lights were clicked off, the room was transformed. The metal body of the projector would quickly heat up, releasing a very specific, unforgettable smell of hot dust and warm metal. Then came the glorious sound, the sharp click-clack as you manually turned the small plastic wheel to advance to the next frame. The whole family would sit closely together in the dark on the sofa. Since there was no audio, reading the captions at the bottom of the glowing pictures became a shared performance. Parents would read the fairy tales aloud, changing their voices for different characters, while children watched the static, brightly colored images with wide-eyed wonder. It forced us to use our imagination, to fill in the silence with our own dreams. The warmth of the projector and the sound of a loved one reading in the dark created a feeling of profound safety and coziness that no modern movie theater can ever replicate. Let us step away from the kitchen and into the hallway, standing before the large wooden mirror. If you close your eyes, you can instantly recognize the heavy, spicy floral scent that defined an entire generation of women. The famous Red Moscow perfume was not just a fragrance. It was a symbol of elegance, maturity, and celebration. The bottle itself was a small treasure, often featuring an elegant glass stopper and presented in a striking red box with delicate golden details. Because luxury goods were incredibly hard to find, a bottle of this perfume was cherished for years, used only on the most important occasions. You would see your mother or grandmother sitting at her vanity, carefully dabbing a single drop behind her ears and onto her wrists before a trip to the theater or a New Year's Eve party. The scent was incredibly potent, a rich mixture of carnation, jasmine, and warm vanilla that commanded attention in any room. During the long, freezing winter months, that unmistakable fragrance would linger on the heavy fur collars of winter coats, creating a beautiful contrast between the bitter cold outside and the warm, powdery elegance of the perfume. Even today, catching a faint hint of that spicy carnation instantly transports you back to the feeling of resting your head on your mother's shoulder, feeling completely safe and loved. Returning to the joy of homemade treats, we absolutely must remember the heavy cast-iron waffle maker. This imposing rectangular metal device was responsible for creating the most cherished childhood desserts. It was incredibly heavy, with thick metal plates that took a wonderfully long time to heat up properly on the stove, or via thick electric cords that always seemed slightly dangerous. The ritual of baking waffles was an event that filled the entire apartment with the heavenly, intoxicating scent of melting butter, sweet vanilla, and toasted sugar. You could hear the sharp hiss as the thick, yellow batter was poured onto the blazing hot metal, followed by the loud clank of the heavy lid being pressed down tightly. But the most exciting and chaotic part was the rolling. The waffles had to be rolled into neat little tubes the very second they came off the hot iron, while they were still soft and painfully hot to the touch. Mothers would burn their fingertips time and time again, working with lightning speed before the waffle cooled and turned brittle. Once they were perfectly crispy, we would eagerly fill the hollow tubes with rich, dark, boiled, condensed milk, painstakingly prepared by boiling a sealed tin can in a pot of water for hours. Biting into that crunchy, sweet, utterly perfect homemade waffle was a taste of pure, unadulterated happiness. Hanging quietly on the kitchen wall, usually right beside the doorway or the old refrigerator, was the tear-off calendar. This small, thick block of cheap, grayish paper was our ultimate guide to the passing year. Every single morning began with the satisfying physical ritual of tearing off yesterday's page. The sound of that thin paper ripping away from the metal binding was the official start of a new day. But this calendar was much more than just a way to check the date. Every single page was a tiny encyclopedia of life. On the back of the delicate paper, printed in tiny, sometimes faded ink, you could find a wealth of information. There were exact times for the sunrise and sunset, phases of the moon, short historical facts, practical gardening advice, and simple recipes for dinner. Sometimes you would find a short poem or a gentle joke that you would read aloud to the family over breakfast. We did not just throw these pages away. If a page had a particularly good recipe for pickling cucumbers or an interesting medical tip, it was carefully folded and saved in a special box or tucked inside a thick cookbook. As the year went on, the thick block of paper slowly dwindled, giving us a very real, tactile sense of time passing. We could literally feel the year slipping through our fingers, day by delicate day. No Russian household in the 1980s was complete without a specific item hiding in the medicine cabinet or the drawer of the nightstand. It was a tiny, flat, bright red tin box featuring a golden star. This balm was the universal, undisputed cure for absolutely every ailment known to man. Opening the tin was an extreme challenge of its own. You had to dig your fingernails deeply into the microscopic gap between the lid and the base, twisting and prying until it finally popped open. Once opened, the room was instantly filled with an overwhelmingly powerful, eye-watering aroma of eucalyptus, peppermint, camphor, and clove oil. It was a smell that cleared your sinuses from across the room. Whenever the first sign of a winter cold appeared, a mother's thumb would heavily coat your temples, the bridge of your nose, and your chest with this greasy yellow ointment. The sensation was unforgettable, a fierce, freezing burn that somehow felt deeply comforting, because it meant you were being taken care of. We believed in the magic of that little red tin with all our hearts. It was rubbed on mosquito bites in the summer, applied to aching joints, and inhaled deeply when we coughed. That tiny star was a beacon of health, and the sharp scent of camphor is forever locked in our memories as the smell of a mother's anxious love. Let us cast our eyes to the walls of the living room or the bedroom. There, dominating the space, was the magnificent, heavy wall carpet. For a modern observer, hanging a large wool rug on a wall might seem bizarre, but for us, it was an absolute necessity of life. These carpets, with their intricate dark red, burgundy, and brown geometric patterns, served incredibly important purposes. The walls in the prefabricated concrete apartment buildings were notoriously thin and freezing cold during the harsh winters. The thick wool of the carpet provided crucial insulation, keeping the room warm and softening the sounds of the neighbors next door. But beyond utility, the carpet was the canvas of our childhood imagination. How many of us fell asleep lying with our backs against the warm, slightly scratchy wool? In the dim light of the evening, before sleep finally came, we would trace the complex, swirling patterns with our index fingers. We would stare at the shapes until they magically transformed into faces, mysterious animals, or hidden landscapes. The carpet was also a source of endless weekend chores. In the dead of winter, the whole family would take the heavy carpet outside into the fresh, pristine snow. We would throw it face down and beat the dust out of it with a plastic paddle, leaving it smelling of fresh frost and clean winter air. When it was time to celebrate a birthday or host guests for a holiday dinner, a magnificent object would appear in the center of the dining table. It was the heavy glass siphon for carbonated water. Before the days of brightly colored plastic bottles lining supermarket shelves, having sparkling water at home was a true event, a small luxury that required specialized equipment. The siphon was a beautiful, heavy glass bottle, sometimes encased in a protective metal mesh, with a shiny metal lever at the top. The real magic happened when a parent bought small, heavy silver cartridges filled with compressed gas. You would screw the cartridge into the side of the metal head, and suddenly, with a loud, aggressive hiss that always made children jump, the gas would shoot into the cold water. The bottle would instantly fill with 1,000,000 dancing bubbles. We would pour sweet, sticky, homemade cherry or raspberry jam into the bottom of a glass and hit it with the freshly carbonated water, watching the dark red syrup swirl into a beautiful pink fizz. The bubbles were sharp and strong, tickling your nose as you drank. Serving drinks from the siphon made any ordinary evening feel incredibly festive, giving us the sheer joy of creating our own fizzy lemonade, right in the comfort of our own kitchen. In the corner of the living room sat the ultimate centerpiece of evening entertainment, the massive, heavy, wooden television set. Brands like Reuben or Record were substantial pieces of furniture, glowing with a warm, flickering light. But the true memory here is not just the television itself, but the strange tools we used to operate it. The plastic dial used for switching between the 2 or 3 available channels was notoriously fragile. It would inevitably crack and fall off after a few years of heavy use. Instead of buying a new television, which was impossibly expensive and required waiting on a list for months, every family simply placed a heavy pair of metal pliers permanently on top of the wooden cabinet. Whenever it was time to watch the evening news or the beloved nightly cartoon, you would grab those cold metal pliers, clamp them tightly onto the bare metal rod sticking out of the TV, and turn it with a loud, heavy clunk. Adjusting the picture also involved meticulously moving the 2 long metal antennae, sometimes attaching a piece of foil to catch a better signal through the snow and static. We did not have remote controls. We had to physically walk over, turn the pliers, and adjust the dials, making watching television an intentional, physical choice rather than endless, mindless scrolling. When the bitter winter brought a severe cough or bronchitis, the local doctor, or our grandmothers, would turn to a medical ritual that was simultaneously terrifying and deeply comforting. I am speaking of the thick medical cupping glasses. The preparation looked like something out of an ancient magic spell. Your mother would take a long metal stick, wrap the end tightly with cotton, and dip it in strong-smelling medical alcohol. She would strike a match, and suddenly the stick was ablaze. You would lie perfectly still on your stomach, feeling the cool air on your bare back. With a swift, practiced motion, she would thrust the flaming stick inside the glass jar for a split second to burn up the oxygen, and then instantly press the hot rim of the glass firmly onto your skin. You could feel the intense, pulling sensation as your skin was sucked up into the vacuum. Soon, your entire back was covered in a dozen tightly gripping glass domes. You were commanded to lie perfectly still under a heavy wool blanket for 15 minutes, listening to the quiet clinking of the glasses if you dared to breathe too deeply. When they were finally popped off, with a strange squelching sound, they left behind perfectly round, dark purple circles on your back. We wore those bruises like badges of honor, a physical testament to a mother's fierce dedication to curing our winter chills. Early in the morning, while the streets were still covered in a thin layer of frost, and the sky was barely turning gray, it was time to fetch the milk. We did not buy milk in convenient cardboard cartons. We carried it in a beloved aluminum milk can. This lightweight, cylindrical metal container, with its simple wire handle and smooth wooden grip, was a staple of every household. The lid attached with a loose chain would clink gently against the side of the can as you walked down the street. The destination was the large yellow metal barrel on wheels that arrived in the neighborhood, operated by a stern but friendly woman in a white apron. Standing in line with your neighbors, you held your cold metal can, exchanging local news and morning greetings. When it was your turn, the seller would use a specialized measuring scoop, pouring the pure, cold, incredibly fresh milk directly into your can. The splashing sound of the milk hitting the aluminum was distinct and satisfying. As you hurried back home, careful not to spill a drop, the cold metal would chill your leg through your trousers. Bringing that full, heavy can into the warm kitchen meant the family would have sweet milk porridge for breakfast, and the rich smell of fresh, unpasteurized dairy would fill the air. Hanging high on the wall, measuring out the quiet moments of our lives, was the wooden cuckoo clock. Shaped like a charming little forest chalet, often made by the famous Mayak factory, it was a mechanical marvel that fascinated every child. The clock featured beautifully carved wooden leaves and a tiny door right at the top. From the bottom hung two heavy, solid metal weights, shaped like pine cones, suspended on long brass chains. The rhythmic, heavy ticking of the pendulum, swinging back and forth, was the heartbeat of the apartment. It was a comforting, predictable sound that assured you everything was normal and safe. But the real joy came exactly at the top of every hour. The tiny wooden door would suddenly snap open, and a little mechanical bird would pop out, bowing forward as a clever system of small bellows inside produced that iconic, melodic cuckoo sound. It was our alarm, our reminder to do homework, and our signal that it was time for dinner. Winding the clock was a daily chore, gently pulling the brass chains to raise the heavy pine cone weights back to the top. This simple, mechanical interaction kept the heart of the home beating, reminding us that time was something physical, something we had to carefully maintain and respect. For the teenagers and music lovers of the era, the ultimate dream was owning a heavy, reel-to-reel tape recorder. These were massive, imposing machines, weighing incredibly heavy, encased in plastic and wood, with heavy mechanical buttons that required real force to press down. Listening to music was a deeply deliberate ritual. You had to carefully take the large plastic reel, holding the fragile brown magnetic tape, place it on the spindle, and meticulously thread the thin ribbon through the intricate metal heads and rollers before securing it to the empty take-up reel on the other side. When you pressed the play button with a loud click, the reels would start spinning, and the room would fill with the crackling, warm sound of underground bards, forbidden foreign disco, or bootleg rock music. The air around the machine always smelled slightly of warm electronics and magnetic dust. But the tape was incredibly delicate. It would frequently stretch or snap in half, leading to the anxious surgery of splicing the brown ribbon back together, using a tiny piece of clear tape or even nail polish. We traded these reels with friends, copying music in real time, listening quietly in our rooms. It was a tangible, physical relationship with music, completely different from pressing a virtual button on a phone. When it was time to sit down and talk, really talk about life, politics, or family, the vessel we used was as important as the conversation itself. I am remembering the classic faceted glass sitting proudly inside an ornate metal cup holder. Originally designed to keep tea stable on the rocking tables of long-distance trains, this beautiful combination made its way into the cozy kitchens of millions of homes. The glass itself was thick, heavy, and practically indestructible, with its distinct geometric sides catching the light. But the metal holder was the true work of art, often stamped with intricate patterns of space exploration, historical monuments, or delicate floral designs. When you poured boiling water over loose black tea leaves, the glass became far too hot to touch. You had to hold it gracefully by the large, curved handle of the metal base. The ritual involved dropping a few cubes of rough sugar into the dark liquid and stirring vigorously with a silver spoon. The loud, cheerful clinking of the spoon hitting the thick, faceted sides of the glass is a sound that instantly brings back memories of late-night kitchen conversations, where friends gathered over steaming tea to share their deepest hopes, laughing away the darkness of the long winter nights. Let us turn our attention to a household chore that required genuine physical endurance. Ironing clothes in those days was a monumental task, primarily because of the incredible weight of the heavy cast-iron iron. Long before lightweight plastic steam irons, we used solid metal beasts. Some older versions had to be heated directly on the gas stove, while the newer ones had a thick, fabric-wrapped electrical cord that plugged into the wall. It took an agonizingly long time for the thick metal base to heat up properly. There was no automatic steam function. Instead, mothers would fill their mouths with clean water and spray a fine mist directly onto the wrinkled cotton shirts and heavy linen bedsheets to dampen them before pressing. The iron was so heavy that gliding it across the fabric felt like a genuine workout. If you lost focus for even a second, the scorching hot metal would leave a devastating, unfixable brown burn mark on the fabric, filling the room with a terrible smell of scorched cotton. Yet, women ironed absolutely everything, from thick duvet covers to everyday socks, displaying an incredible level of care and pride in their family's appearance. The sheer weight of that iron represented the heavy, undeniable labor of love that kept our families looking neat and respectable. Sitting quietly on the rug in the corner of the children's room was a toy of pure, brilliant simplicity. The Nevalyashka, or the roly-poly doll, was a brightly colored, usually red plastic figure with large painted eyes and a sweet, unchanging smile. The genius of this toy lay in its heavy, weighted base. No matter how hard a child tried to push it down, strike it, or force it to lie flat on the floor, the doll would stubbornly and gracefully wobble right back up to a standing position. As it swayed back and forth, it produced a haunting, beautiful, metallic chiming sound from a bell hidden deep inside its plastic body. That gentle, echoing ding-dong sound is permanently etched into our memories. The smooth, cold plastic was comforting to touch. It required no batteries, had no flashing lights, and never broke down. It was infinitely fascinating to a young mind, offering a quiet lesson in resilience, teaching us that no matter how many times life pushes you down, you must always find your balance and stand back up. In a world full of complex digital entertainment, the profound simplicity of that swaying red doll brings a sharp pang of nostalgia for a time when a simple chime could captivate a child for hours. In the corner of the bedroom or the living room, often doubling as a side table when covered with a lace cloth, was a machine of true creation. The heavy black metal Podolsk sewing machine was an absolute lifeline for families. Covered in beautiful, intricate gold decals, it looked like a piece of industrial art. When you removed the heavy, curved wooden cover, the smell of dark machine oil and old wood drifted into the air. Operating it was an exercise in rhythm and coordination. Whether it used a silver hand crank or a heavy cast-iron foot pedal, the machine produced a loud, rhythmic, whirring sound that meant something new was being born. Because buying new, fashionable clothes was incredibly difficult, mothers became master tailors out of sheer necessity. They would carefully pin thin tissue paper patterns to large pieces of fabric on the floor, and spend their evenings transforming old dresses or simple cuts of cloth into beautiful new outfits for their children. The steady clatter of the needle piercing the fabric late into the night was the sound of incredible resourcefulness and deep love. That machine represented our ability to create beauty out of absolute necessity, stitching our families together with incredibly strong, invisible threads. Finally, we reached the most magical item of all, the massive wooden radiola console. Standing proudly on 4 elegant legs in the living room, this enormous piece of furniture was our primary window to the outside world. It combined a powerful radio receiver with a record player hidden beneath a heavy wooden lid. The front featured a fabric-covered speaker and a beautifully illuminated glass dial displaying the mysterious names of foreign cities. But the most enchanting feature was the magic eye, a glowing green vacuum tube that fluctuated perfectly as you slowly turned the heavy tuning knob, searching for a clear shortwave signal through the thick, atmospheric static. The smell of the warm vacuum tubes heating up the wooden cabinet was intoxicating. Lifting the lid, you could place a thin, flexible blue vinyl record, sometimes literally cut out from the pages of a popular magazine, onto the spinning turntable. As the heavy needle dropped onto the grooves, the warm, rich, crackling sound of music would instantly fill the room. It was not just background noise, it was an event. We would sit on the floor around the wooden cabinet, mesmerized by the glowing green eye and the crackling voice of a singer, feeling deeply connected to a vast, unseen world beyond our windows. When we look back at these heavy cast-iron tools, the fragile glass jars, and the glowing vacuum tubes, we realize something profound. We do not just miss the physical objects themselves. What we truly miss is the feeling of time standing still. We miss our youth, our endless energy, and the beloved faces of our parents and grandparents who used these items alongside us. These everyday things were the silent witnesses to our brightest days, our simplest joys, and our strongest family bonds. The world has changed. It has become faster, shinier, and digital. But the irreplaceable warmth of our memories remains completely untouched. Thank you so much for taking this quiet, nostalgic walk through the past with me today. If this journey warmed your heart, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like to help preserve these beautiful stories. Now, I have an important question for you. Which of these 20 items gave you the strongest wave of nostalgia? And what is your favorite personal memory attached to it? Please open your heart and let me know in the comments below. Until we meet again, cherish your memories and take care of yourselves.